October 14, 2023, Millfield High School. Detective Ray Hutchins had driven 400 miles to spit in the face of 17-year-old Marcus Williams, Jr. 3,000 people watched him storm the field. Security rushed toward him. Hutchins raised his middle finger at the young quarterback, shouted a racial slur that echoed through the stadium speakers, then collapsed. What happened in the next 4 minutes would unravel a 15-year conspiracy. The ambulance couldn't save him, but his final words to Marcus Coleman, watching from the stands, would destroy 3 lives and resurrect one that had been buried in silence. Hutchins whispered coordinates, a name, and the truth about why Marcus's bar was really called Sarah's Place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Coleman's hands gripped the cold metal bleacher rail as Detective Ray Hutchins convulsed on the artificial turf 40 yards below. The paramedics worked frantically, their movements sharp and desperate under the stadium lights. Blood pooled beneath Hutchins' head where he'd struck the ground, dark and spreading like spilled motor oil. The crowd's collective gasp had faded into an uncomfortable murmur. Parents pulled their children closer. The visiting team's quarterback, Marcus Williams, Jr., stood frozen on the sideline, his dark skin glistening with sweat and something else. Fear, maybe, or confusion at the hatred that had just been hurled at him like a weapon. Marcus forced himself to move, descending the bleacher steps with mechanical precision. Each footfall echoed the question hammering in his skull: why was Ray Hutchins here? The detective had no connection to Millfield, no reason to drive from Cincinnati just to unleash racist venom at a high school football game. Unless... Sir, you need to stay back. A young security guard, barely out of high school himself, raised his palm as Marcus approached the field's edge. I'm Marcus Coleman. I used to run security for the NFL. The lie came easily. He'd never mentioned Thew's part involved a very specific reason for leaving. Let me through. The guard hesitated, then stepped aside. Marcus crossed onto the field where chaos reigned in whispered urgency. The ambulance had arrived, its red and blue lights painting the scene in alternating shadows. But as Marcus drew closer to where the paramedics worked, he could see it was already over. Hutchins' eyes found him through the crowd of first responders. Recognition flickered there, followed by something that made Marcus's blood turn to ice water: satisfaction. The detective's lips moved, barely perceptible, and Marcus dropped to his knees beside the stretcher. What did you say? Hutchins' voice was a thread of whisper, forcing Marcus to lean closer. 40.789. 6. Sir, please step back, a paramedic ordered. But Marcus didn't move. North, 84.1172. Hutchins coughed, specks of blood hitting Marcus's cheek. West, coordinates. Marcus's mind automatically filed the numbers, muscle memory from his military days before the NFL, before the bar, before everything went wrong. Sarah, Hutchins breathed, his dying eyes locked onto Marcus's. Sarah Coleman. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His vision tunneled. The stadium noise faded to a distant buzz. Sarah Coleman, the name he'd given his bar 15 years ago, telling everyone in Millfield it was after his grandmother. A harmless lie to explain away the guilt that ate at him every time he poured a drink. But Hutchins knew. Somehow, this dying cop knew about Sarah Brennan, the 18-year-old girl whose body Marcus had helped move off the rain-slicked highway outside Tampa in 2008. The girl Danny Rivera had struck with his Escalade after a night of celebration, 3 days before the biggest game of his NFL career. She was yours, Hutchins whispered, his grip on consciousness fading. Your daughter. DNA confirmed it last week. The world stopped. Marcus had never known Sarah Brennan was pregnant when she'd left him 20 years ago, had never known she'd kept the baby, raised her alone, named her Sarah Coleman in some cruel twist of fate, had never known that when he helped Danny Rivera cover up that hit and run, when he moved the body to make it look like she'd simply lost control of her car, he was burying his own child. The others, Hutchins gasped, Danny's been killing the others who knew. You're next." The detective's hand went limp. The flat-line tone from the portable monitor cut through the Friday night air like a scream. Marcus sat back on his heels, his entire body numb. Around him, the paramedics continued their futile efforts, but all he could hear was the echo of Hutchins' words. "Your daughter. You're next." 15 years he'd been hiding in this small Ohio town, pouring drinks and pretending the nightmares would eventually stop. 15 years of telling himself that covering up Danny Rivera's crime had been about protecting a career, about loyalty, about the greater good of the franchise. But Sarah Brennan had been Sarah Coleman, his daughter, and every drink he'd poured in her memory, every time he'd looked at that bar's sign, every moment he'd convinced himself he could live with what he'd done. It had all been built on a lie that was somehow even worse than the truth. The paramedics began packing their equipment. The crowd was dispersing, the game suspended, parents ushering children toward parking lots and the safety of their cars. Soon the stadium would be empty except for the cleanup crew and the echoes of what had happened here. Marcus pulled out his phone and entered the coordinates Hutchins had given him. The GPS showed a location in southern Ohio, near the Kentucky border, middle of nowhere farmland. He had two choices: drive to whatever Hutchins had hidden at those coordinates, or go home to his bar and wait for Danny Rivera to finish what he'd apparently started with the other witnesses. Marcus looked back at the visiting team's bench, where young Marcus Williams Jr. was being comforted by his coach, still shaken by the unprovoked attack. Tomorrow the kid would probably forget this night ever happened. He'd go on to play college ball, maybe even the pros, unburdened by the weight of secrets that could destroy him. Marcus Coleman didn't have that luxury anymore. He started walking toward the parking lot, toward his truck, toward coordinates that might finally tell him how his daughter really died. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, smash that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're diving deep into Marcus's dark past with the NFL, and you won't want to miss the shocking revelation about who else was in that car 15 years ago. Trust me, you'll never see this twist coming. Past the grain elevator that dominated the skyline like a concrete monument to simpler times, past the shuttered Woolworths where teenagers still gathered on Friday nights when there wasn't a football game. His hands shook against the steering wheel of his Ford pickup. The coordinates Hutchins had whispered burning in his memory like a brand. "Your daughter." The words echoed with each streetlight that passed overhead, casting alternating shadows across his weathered face. In the rearview mirror, the stadium lights grew smaller, but the weight of what had happened there seemed to expand, filling the cab of his truck until he could barely breathe. Sarah's Tap sat at the corner of Main and Cedar, its neon beer signs casting a familiar amber glow through windows Marcus had cleaned 1,000 times. He pulled into the gravel lot behind the building, gravel crunching under his tires with a sound that usually meant home, safety, the end of another quiet day in a town where nothing ever happened. Tonight it sounded like bones breaking. The back door's hinges squealed as he pushed inside, the smell of stale beer and decades-old cigarette smoke wrapping around him like an old coat. He'd bought this place with cash 15 years ago. No questions asked, no background checks beyond what his military record and a fake recommendation from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers could provide. In a town like Millfield, that was enough. Hell, it was more than enough. It made him something of a local celebrity. Marcus flipped on the lights and stood in the narrow hallway between his small office and the bar proper. 24 stools, 12 tables, one pool table with a slight warp that made the 8-ball curve left, and a jukebox that still played actual CDs. On busy nights, Friday after home games, Saturday when the farmers finished their work early, he might serve 40 people. Most nights it was half that. Simple, predictable, safe. He walked to the bar and poured himself 3 fingers of Jack Daniels, the bottle's neck rattling against the glass rim. His reflection stared back from the mirror behind the liquor shelf, and for a moment he saw not the 58-year-old bar owner the town knew, but the man he'd been in Tampa, Marcus Tank Coleman, head of security for a franchise worth billions, the guy who made problems disappear, the guy who'd made his own daughter disappear. The whiskey burned, going down, but it didn't touch the cold that had settled in his chest. He pulled out his phone again, the coordinates glowing on the screen. 2 hours south, maybe 3 in the dark. Whatever Hutchins had hidden there, it had been important enough for the detective to drive from Cincinnati just to tell him about it. Important enough to die for. A soft knock on the front door made him freeze. Through the frosted glass he could see a slight figure silhouetted against the streetlight. Marcus set down his glass and walked over, his hand instinctively moving to the 38 he kept behind the register. "We're closed," he called through the door. "Marcus? It's Jenny. I saw your truck." He exhaled slowly and unlocked the door. Jenny Martinez stood on the sidewalk in her nurse's scrubs, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than her 43 years. She worked the night shift at Millfield General, had been stopping by for coffee and conversation after her shifts for the past 2 years. It was as close to a relationship as Marcus had allowed himself since moving here. "Rough night?" she asked, studying his face with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen trauma in all its forms. The game got suspended. Some fan had a heart attack on the field. "I heard the ambulance go by. Was it anyone we know?" Marcus hesitated. In a town of 8,000, everyone was someone you knew, or at least someone whose cousin you'd met at the hardware store. But Ray Hutchins was a stranger, a ghost from a past Marcus had spent 15 years trying to forget. "No," he said finally. "Nobody from around here." Jenny stepped closer, her fingers finding his arm. Her touch was warm, real, uncomplicated. Everything his life had been for the past 15 years. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She had no idea how close to the truth she was. Marcus forced a smile that felt like broken glass. "Just tired, long day. Want me to stay? I don't have to be back at the hospital until tomorrow night." The offer hung between them, heavy with implications they'd both been dancing around for months. Jenny was good people, divorced, raising a teenage daughter on her own, the kind of woman who deserved better than a man with Marcus's secrets. But God, the temptation to say yes, to lose himself in her warmth and pretend that Ray Hutchins had never whispered those coordinates, never spoken Sarah's name. "Rain check?" he managed. Disappointment flickered across her features, but she nodded. "Call me if you need anything." Marcus watched her walk back to her Honda Civic, her footsteps echoing off the empty storefronts. When her taillights disappeared around the corner, he locked the door and returned to his whiskey. The coordinates seemed to pulse on his phone screen. Waiting. The whiskey sat untouched as Marcus stared at his phone, thumb hovering over the call log. 3 missed calls from an unknown number, all coming in during the last hour of the game when he'd been watching Hutchins die on that field. He'd been too shaken to notice them at the time, but now they glowed on his screen like warning beacons. The phone rang again. Same number. Marcus let it go to voicemail, then immediately played the message back. A voice he hadn't heard in 15 years filled the empty bar, smooth and confident, carrying the same arrogant charm that had made Danny Rivera America's sweetheart quarterback. "Tank, old buddy, I know you're there. I know what happened tonight. And I know that son of a bitch Hutchins found you before he croaked." A pause, the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "We need to talk. You've got something that belongs to me now, and I've got something you're going to want to hear about that little girl. Call me back in 1 hour, or I start making calls of my own. You remember how that works." The line went dead. Marcus's hand trembled as he set the phone down. That little girl. Not even her name. Just a dismissive phrase that reduced Sarah to collateral damage. The same way Danny had talked about her that night in 2008, standing over her broken body on Highway 301 while rain hammered the asphalt around them. It's just some college kid, Tank, probably drunk. Could happen to anyone. But it hadn't been just some college kid. It had been his daughter, and Danny had known it. The realization hit him like a physical blow. There was no way Danny could have known Sarah was Marcus's daughter unless he'd planned it, unless that night hadn't been the random accident they'd staged it to look like. Marcus poured another whiskey with shaking hands, his mind racing through the implications. If Danny had known about Sarah, had somehow found out about the brief relationship Marcus had with her mother 20 years earlier, then the hit and run wasn't manslaughter, it was murder. Calculated, deliberate, designed to destroy Marcus in the most devastating way possible. But why? What could Marcus have done to deserve that level of betrayal? The answer came like a whisper from his own memory. A conversation he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself it never happened. 2 weeks before Sarah died, Marcus had walked into the team facility early and found Danny in the equipment room with a briefcase full of cash and a man Marcus recognized from the FBI's organized crime photos. Point shaving, game fixing, the kind of federal crime that would have destroyed not just Danny's career, but the entire franchise. Danny had begged him to keep quiet, promised it was a one-time thing, sworn on his mother's grave that it would never happen again. And Marcus, stupidly loyal, had agreed to look the other way. 1 week later, he'd started having second thoughts, had begun asking questions, had even drafted a letter to the league office that he'd never sent. Someone had seen that letter. Someone had told Danny about it. And Sarah Coleman, had paid the price. The phone buzzed with a text message. A photo, Jenny Martinez walking to her car outside the hospital, unaware she was being watched. Below it, a simple message, 45 minutes now. Don't make me remind you what happens to people who disappoint me. Marcus grabbed the bottle of Jack and hurled it against the mirror behind the bar. Glass exploded across the floor in a shower of amber and silver, reflecting the bar's lights like 1,000 fractured stars. The sound echoed through the empty building, but it wasn't loud enough to drown out the roaring in his ears. 15 years. 15 years he'd hidden in this town, pouring drinks and making small talk and pretending he could build a life worth living. 15 years of telling himself that protecting Danny Rivera had been the right choice, that sometimes good men had to do terrible things for the greater good. But there was no greater good. There had only been a murderer and the fool who'd helped him cover it up. A murderer who was now threatening the one decent thing left in Marcus's life. Marcus pulled out his keys and headed for the back door. The coordinates Hutchins had given him would have to wait. Right now, he had 43 minutes to get to Danny Rivera before Danny got to Jenny. 43 minutes to end this thing that had started with a dead girl on a rain-soaked highway and a lie that had poisoned everything it touched. As he climbed into his truck, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the side mirror. For the first time in 15 years, he looked like Tank Coleman again, the man who'd once made problems disappear. Tonight, he was going to make one more thing disappear, the bastard who'd killed his daughter. The truck's engine turned over with a reluctant growl, but as Marcus threw it into reverse, doubt crept in like ice water through his veins. What the hell was he doing? Driving to confront Danny Rivera with nothing but rage and a 15-year-old grudge? The man who'd systematically eliminated witnesses, who had resources Marcus couldn't even imagine? His phone buzzed again. Another photo of Jenny, this one taken through the hospital break room window. She was pouring coffee, completely unaware of the telephoto lens capturing her every movement. Marcus slammed the gear shift back into park. His breathing came in short, sharp bursts as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. He wasn't Tank Coleman anymore. That man had died the night he helped move Sarah's body. He was just Marcus, a washed-up bar owner in a nowhere town, and Danny Rivera was still the golden boy with connections that reached into every corner of professional sports. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number from the missed calls. It rang once. "There's my boy," Danny's voice oozed through the speaker. "I was starting to worry you'd do something stupid. What do you want?" "Straight to business." "I like that. What I want is whatever Hutchins gave you before he keeled over. Documents, recordings, evidence, all of it. He didn't give me anything." Danny's laugh was like broken glass. "Tank, Tank, Tank. You always were a terrible liar. That's what I liked about you back in the day, honest to a fault." "Well, mostly honest." A pause. "I've got 3 witnesses who saw you having a cozy little chat with Detective Hutchins before he flatlined. Now, what did he tell you?" Marcus closed his eyes, thinking of the coordinates burning in his memory. Whatever Hutchins had hidden, it was the only leverage he had left. Just coordinates. Some location down south. Good boy. See how easy that was? Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to drive to those coordinates, you're going to collect whatever's there, and you're going to bring it straight to me. No stops, no copies, no backup plans. And if I don't, Then your girlfriend works a night shift in a hospital that's getting very lax about security lately. Amazing how easy it is to walk into those places wearing scrubs. Hell, you could inject someone with air and it'd look like a heart attack. Happens all the time. The casual way Danny discussed Jenny's murder made Marcus's vision blur red around the edges. She's got nothing to do with this. Neither did that pretty little thing you've been calling Sarah for 15 years. But that didn't stop you from helping me clean up the mess, did it? I didn't know she was my daughter. But I did. Danny's voice dropped to a whisper. I knew exactly who she was when I put my foot on that gas pedal. Sweet little Sarah Coleman, trying to make it through nursing school, just like her boyfriend's mama did. Such a shame about that rainy night. The words hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. You son of a bitch. Easy there, Tank. Save the rage for someone who gives a damn. You've got 2 hours to get to those coordinates and 2 more to get back to me with whatever Hutchins stashed. My GPS says you should be able to make it if you don't stop for coffee. Where do I meet you? I'll be in touch. And Marcus, if you're thinking about calling the cops, remember that I've got friends in very high places, friends who owe me favors, friends who could make your little nurse disappear without a trace. The line went dead. Marcus sat in his truck behind the bar, engine running, hands shaking against the steering wheel. Through the rear window of Sarah's tap, he could see the shattered mirror reflecting the overhead lights in 1,000 fragments. Just like his life, broken into pieces too small to put back together. But maybe that was the point. Maybe Tank Coleman needed to stay broken. Maybe the man who'd covered up his own daughter's murder deserved to spend the rest of his life picking up glass and bleeding. Except Jenny didn't deserve to die for his sins. Marcus pulled out his phone and typed a quick text. Family emergency. Stay at the hospital tonight. Don't go home alone, trust me. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then threw the truck into drive. The coordinates were burned into his memory now. 40.7896 north, 84.1172 west. Whatever Detective Hutchins had hidden there, it was worth dying for. As he pulled onto Main Street, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement in his rearview mirror. A dark sedan, headlights off, sliding out from behind the grain elevator. Following at a distance, Danny wasn't taking any chances. The Golden Boy was watching every move, making sure his old security chief stayed in line, just like he had 15 years ago. The sedan stayed 3 car lengths back as Marcus navigated the empty streets of Millfield, its presence like a weight pressing down on his chest. He forced himself to maintain normal speed, hands steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. At the town limits, he turned south on Highway 33, watching the grain elevator disappear in his mirrors along with the last traces of the life he'd built on lies. The coordinates led toward Portsmouth, down through counties where the farmland gave way to rolling hills and forgotten mining towns. Marcus had driven these roads before, years ago, when he first arrived in Ohio looking for a place to disappear. Back then he'd been running from guilt. Tonight he was running toward the truth of what it had cost him. His phone buzzed with a response from Jenny. What kind of emergency? Are you okay? Marcus stared at the message as red taillights blurred ahead of him. How could he explain that the emergency was 15 years in the making? That every conversation they'd shared, every moment of tenderness between them, had been built on the foundation of his daughter's grave? Can't explain now. Please just trust me. Stay safe. The response came immediately. You're scaring me. Good. Scared meant careful. Scared meant she might actually listen and stay at the hospital where there were witnesses, security cameras, people who would notice if a woman in scrubs suddenly stopped breathing. The sedan had fallen back, barely visible now in the darkness, but Marcus knew it was there. Danny's insurance policy, making sure his old fixer didn't develop a conscience 20 years too late. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent so many nights tailing people for Danny, sitting in parking lots and hotel lobbies, documenting infidelities and gambling debts and all the little human weaknesses that could be leveraged when needed. Now he was the one being watched. The hunter had become the prey. Miles rolled past in a hypnotic rhythm of yellow lines and reflector posts. Marcus found himself thinking about Sarah, not the broken body he'd helped hide, but the daughter he'd never known existed. What had she been like? Had she inherited his stubborn streak, his tendency to see the world in black and white? Her mother, Lisa, had possessed a quiet strength that Marcus had never appreciated until it was gone. Had Sarah carried that same strength into her 20 years of life? The questions multiplied like cancer cells, spreading through his thoughts until he could barely focus on the road. Every exit sign became an accusation. New Boston, 15 miles. 15 years since he'd buried the truth. Portsmouth, 32 miles. 32 years old when he'd first held Sarah as a newborn, then walked away because he wasn't ready to be a father. His phone rang. Not Danny this time. A local number he didn't recognize. Yeah? Marcus? It's Tom Bradley. Sorry to bother you so late. Marcus's blood chilled. Tom was Millfield's police chief, a good man who'd served the town honestly for 23 years. If he was calling at midnight, it meant something had gone wrong. What is it, Tom? We've got a situation at the hospital. Someone broke into the pharmacy about an hour ago. Took some heavy-duty sedatives, couple other things. Security footage has been wiped, but... Tom's voice trailed off. Jenny Martinez was supposed to be working tonight, but she called in sick suddenly. Her supervisor says it was real last minute, right after she got a text from someone. The sedan's headlights flashed once in Marcus's rearview mirror. A signal, a reminder. Is she okay? Marcus managed to ask. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Her daughter's worried sick, says Jenny left the house around 11, wouldn't say where she was going. You haven't heard from her, have you? Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Danny had her. Despite his text warning, despite his desperate hope that she'd stay safe, Danny fucking Rivera had her. Marcus? You there? Yeah, I'm out of town. Family emergency. Everything all right? You sound... Tom, listen to me carefully. You need to put out a bolo for Jenny Martinez. She's in danger, real danger. What kind of danger? Marcus, if you know something. The line went dead. Marcus looked at his phone screen. Call disconnected. No signal. Out here in the hills between nowhere and nothing, cell towers were as scarce as honest politicians. Or maybe the signal wasn't dead by accident. Maybe Danny's people had ways of making sure Marcus couldn't call for help, couldn't warn anyone, couldn't do anything but follow orders like the loyal dog he'd been for 15 years. The coordinates were still 30 miles away, but Marcus could already feel the weight of whatever Hutchins had hidden there. Evidence of Danny's crimes, most likely. Photos, documents, witness statements, the kind of ammunition that could bring down even a golden boy with connections in high places. But it didn't matter now. Even if Hutchins had recorded Danny confessing to murder, even if he'd documented every cover-up and payoff and silenced witness, it was all worthless as long as Jenny's life hung in the balance. The sedan's headlights flashed again, twice this time. Faster. Danny was getting impatient. Marcus floored the accelerator, his truck lurching forward as the speedometer climbed past 70. The sedan behind him matched his pace effortlessly, its headlights boring into his mirrors like predatory eyes. 23 miles to the coordinates now. 23 miles to whatever truth detective Hutchins had died trying to preserve. The phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Jenny says hello. She's very comfortable. For now? Attached was a photo that made Marcus's stomach drop through the floorboards. Jenny sat in what looked like a warehouse, zip-tied to a metal chair, her nurse's scrubs torn at the shoulder. Her eyes were wide with fear but alert. She was alive, conscious, unharmed. But the message was crystal clear. Danny Rivera held all the cards. Marcus jabbed the callback button, his hands shaking with rage. It rang twice before Danny's voice filled the cab. Like the accommodations? I thought she might prefer somewhere private for our little reunion. If you hurt her, you'll what? Come after me with your righteous fury. Tank, you seem to forget that you're an accomplice to murder. I've got bank records showing payments to you for 15 years. I've got photos of you moving evidence. Hell, I've got the burner phone used to coordinate the cover-up. Danny's laugh was cold as winter steel. You're not the hero of this story, old man. You're just another criminal trying to save his own ass. The words hit home because they carried truth. Marcus had taken Danny's money, month after month, telling himself it was payment for his silence rather than acknowledgement of his guilt. He'd cashed every check, deposited every wire transfer, built his new life on blood money. "But here's what you don't understand," Marcus said, his voice steadying as something crystallized in his mind. "I'm not trying to save my ass anymore. I'm trying to save hers. Touching, really. But it doesn't change the math. You get me whatever Hutchins hid, I let your girlfriend go. You try to be clever, she dies slow. Simple economics." The GPS showed 15 miles to destination. Marcus could see the sedan gaining ground in his peripheral vision, close enough now that he could make out two silhouettes in the front seats. Professional shadows, the kind of men who cleaned up messes without asking questions. "You killed my daughter," Marcus said quietly. "I killed a liability. The fact that she happened to share your DNA was just poetic justice." "Why?" The question tore from Marcus's throat like shrapnel. "What did I do to deserve that?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different tone, something almost like genuine emotion bleeding through the practiced charm. "You were going to rat me out, Tank. I saw that letter you wrote to Commissioner Taggart. Never sent it, but you wrote every fucking word." A pause, ice clinking in a glass. "Do you know what it's like to build an empire only to watch your closest friend prepare to burn it down? To know that someone you trusted with your life was ready to throw you to the wolves over some gambling debts?" The letter. Marcus had forgotten about the letter, drafted in a moment of conscience and deleted the next morning. He'd never sent it, never even saved it, but Danny had seen it somehow. Had been watching, waiting, calculating the perfect revenge. "So you decided to destroy me first." "I decided to teach you about consequences. About what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you." Danny's voice hardened again. That sweet little nursing student was just the delivery method. The real message was watching you choose between justice for your own flesh and blood and loyalty to me. And you chose loyalty, didn't you, Tank? You chose to cover it up. The truck crested a hill, and Marcus saw his destination spread out below, an abandoned mining operation. Rusted equipment scattered across a moonlit valley like the bones of prehistoric beasts. The coordinates pointed to a small outbuilding near the main structure, its windows dark and broken. "I didn't know she was my daughter," Marcus repeated, but the words felt hollow now. "But you suspected, didn't you? Deep down. The age was right, the timing, the fact that she was studying nursing just like her mother. You knew, Tank, you just didn't want to know." The accusation hit like a physical blow because it carried the weight of truth. In those terrible hours after the crash, as they'd moved Sarah's body and staged the scene, Marcus had felt something familiar about her face. Something that reminded him of Lisa Brennan, the nurse he'd loved briefly and lost completely 20 years before. He'd pushed the thought away, buried it under layers of duty and denial, but it had been there. The possibility that this broken girl might be his own blood. 10 miles out," Marcus said, his voice dead. "Good boy. And Tank, when this is over, when you've delivered Hutchins' little insurance policy, remember that you had a choice. You could have died a hero's death 15 years ago. Instead, you chose to live as my dog." The sedan's headlights flashed again, twice this time. Faster. Danny was getting impatient. Marcus cut the engine at the edge of the mining site, gravel crunching beneath his boots as he stepped into the cold night air. The abandoned operation stretched before him like a graveyard of industrial ambition, rusted conveyor belts snaking between skeletal buildings, their metal bones bleached silver by moonlight. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the sedan's engine as it pulled to a stop 50 yards behind him. His phone buzzed, building on the left. "You have 20 minutes before Jenny starts losing fingers." The casual brutality of the message made Marcus's jaw clench. Danny had always possessed that particular gift, the ability to discuss violence like a dinner menu, clinical and detached. It was what made him so effective at making problems disappear. It was also what made him so goddamn dangerous. Marcus approached the outbuilding, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a structure that had once housed mining equipment, but now stood hollow and forgotten. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, and his footsteps echoed off concrete walls as he entered. The coordinates led him to the northeast corner, where a section of floor had been carefully removed and replaced. Recent work. The concrete edges were cleaner than the rest, the mortar still slightly different in color. Hutchins had been thorough but not invisible. It took 10 minutes of prying with a tire iron from his truck to lift the concrete slab. Beneath it, wrapped in multiple layers of waterproof plastic, was a metal case about the size of a briefcase. Marcus lifted it with trembling hands, feeling the weight of 15 years' worth of secrets. Inside, photographs, documents, audio recordings on digital drives. But more than that, a complete timeline of Danny Rivera's crimes stretching back 20 years. Not just the hit and run that killed Sarah, but a pattern of violence, corruption, and cover-ups that painted a picture of a man who viewed human life as collateral damage in his pursuit of success. The photos hit hardest. Sarah alive, school pictures, candid shots, images that showed the vibrant young woman she'd been before Danny's car crushed her dreams into twisted metal, but also photos of the crime scene before the cover-up, showing details that had been erased from the official record. Skid marks in the wrong place, blood spatter that didn't match the fabricated story, evidence that would have convicted Danny Rivera if anyone had cared enough to look. Marcus's hands shook as he flipped through witness statements from people who'd disappeared over the years. A homeless man who'd seen the actual crash, a night shift worker who'd spotted Danny's distinctive BMW leaving the scene, a paramedic who'd questioned the body's positioning, all of them silenced, relocated, or worse. At the bottom of the case, a handwritten letter from Detective Ray Hutchins, dated just 3 days ago. "You're reading this. I'm probably dead. 15 years I've carried this poison, watching a killer walk free while good people suffered for his crimes. I was a coward, Marcus. Just like you, Danny bought my silence with threats against my family, and I took his money rather than do my job. But I never stopped investigating. Every witness he thought was gone, I tracked down. Every piece of evidence he thought was destroyed, I preserved. This case contains enough proof to put Danny Rivera in prison for the rest of his life. The girl's name was Sarah Coleman. She was your daughter, Marcus. Lisa Brennan never told you because she was afraid you'd choose duty over family. She was right to be afraid. But Sarah deserved better than both of us. She deserved justice. Don't make my mistake. Don't let him win again." The letter was signed in a shaky hand, as if Hutchins had written it while dying. Marcus's phone rang. He answered without looking at the screen. "Time's up, Tank. What did you find?" "Everything." Marcus's voice came out steady, despite the hurricane of emotions raging in his chest. "Photos, statements, recordings. Enough to bury you 10 times over. Good. Now bring it to me." "No." The silence on the line stretched like a held breath. When Danny spoke again, his voice carried the edge of a blade. "Excuse me?" "I said no, you murdering piece of shit. I'm done being your dog." Marcus could hear the change in Danny's breathing, the shift from confident control to something sharper, more dangerous. "Marcus, I've got your girlfriend tied to a chair with a gun to her head. This isn't the time to grow a conscience. My conscience grew the night you killed my daughter. It just took me 15 years to listen to it. Then listen to this." The phone went silent for a moment. Then Jenny's voice came through, strained but defiant. "Marcus, don't!" The sound cut off abruptly, replaced by Danny's cold laugh. "You've got 1 hour to deliver that case, or I'll make sure she suffers for every minute of your rebellion. And Tank, remember that I'm not just some washed-up quarterback anymore. I have resources you can't imagine." The line went dead. Marcus looked down at the evidence in his hands, proof of his daughter's murder, validation of 15 years of buried guilt, the key to destroying the man who'd poisoned both their lives. For the first time in decades, Marcus Coleman knew exactly what he had to do. Marcus sat in the darkness of the abandoned mining building, clutching the evidence that could destroy Danny Rivera, and felt something shift inside him, a tectonic movement of the soul that had been building for 15 years. The terrified, complicit man who had helped cover up his own daughter's murder was dying, and in his place, something harder was being born. He pulled out his phone, and dialed a number he'd memorized but never used. FBI Cleveland Field Office, Agent Sarah Chen speaking. Agent Chen, my name is Marcus Coleman. I have information about a homicide that was covered up 15 years ago involving former NFL quarterback Danny Rivera. Sir, it's past midnight. If you'd like to file a report, Danny Rivera murdered my daughter in a hit-and-run in 2008. I helped him cover it up. I have evidence, photos, witness statements, recordings, everything. The line went quiet. Marcus could hear Agent Chen's breathing change, the shift from routine to electric attention that came when something real landed on your desk. Where are you, Mr. Coleman? Marcus gave her the coordinates, then added, Agent Chen, Rivera has kidnapped a woman named Jenny Martinez. She's a nurse at Millfield General. He's using her to force me to turn over the evidence. I need you to understand, I'm not trading my daughter's justice for anyone's life, not even someone I love. Mr. Coleman, do not attempt to... Marcus ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Tank? Danny's voice carried surprised amusement. Change of heart already? I want to make a trade. Smart man. Bring the case to the warehouse district on 5th Street, Building 47. You've got 30 minutes. No. You come here, alone. Danny laughed, but there was an edge to it now. You're not exactly in a position to dictate terms. I'm in the position of someone with nothing left to lose, Marcus said quietly. You took my daughter. You took 15 years of my life. You turned me into something I hate. But you made one mistake, Danny. What's that? You assumed I still cared about saving myself. Marcus could hear Danny's breathing change, the same shift from control to uncertainty that had marked the beginning of the end for every opponent who'd ever faced him on a football field. If you're thinking about being a hero, I'm thinking about being a father, something you'll never understand. Marcus's voice carried a certainty that surprised him. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come here, alone, and you're going to face the evidence of what you did to Sarah, and then you're going to live with the consequences. And Jenny dies. Maybe, probably. But you're going to prison either way, Danny. I've already made some calls. The silence stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if Danny had hung up. When he spoke again, his voice carried a tone Marcus had never heard before, something almost like respect. You know what, Tank? I underestimated you. 15 years I've been waiting for you to grow a spine, and you picked tonight to find one. Tonight's the night I finally met my daughter. She's been dead for 15 years. No, Marcus said, looking down at the photographs scattered around him. Sarah's school picture, her nursing school graduation, images of the vibrant young woman she'd been. She's been waiting for 15 years. There's a difference. Through the broken windows, Marcus could see headlights cutting through the darkness. Not the sedan that had followed him. Something bigger, faster. Danny's cavalry arriving to clean up another mess. But there were other lights too, distant but approaching. Federal agents, he hoped. The law finally coming to balance the scales. You really think you can win this? Danny asked. I think I already have. Marcus stood up, the case of evidence clutched in his hands. You know what your real mistake was, Danny? You taught me that some things are worth dying for. You just never expected I'd learn the lesson. Car doors slammed outside, footsteps on gravel, voices calling orders in the darkness. The past and present were finally colliding, 15 years of buried truth rising to the surface like bodies from a lake. Marcus heard Jenny's voice in the distance, crying out his name, alive, conscious, fighting. His heart clenched with relief and terror as he realized that Danny had brought her here, either as insurance or as bait for one final confrontation. Time's up, Tank. Danny's voice came from outside now, no longer filtered through phone speakers. Real and immediate and closer than he'd been in 15 years. Marcus Coleman stepped into the doorway of the abandoned building, evidence of his daughter's murder in his hands, and faced the man who had destroyed both their lives. Time's up for both of us, he said, and stepped into the light. The light that Marcus stepped into wasn't the harsh glare of police spotlights he'd expected, but something softer, dawn breaking over the Ohio hills, painting the abandoned mining site in shades of gold and amber. He'd lost track of time in the darkness, but somewhere between midnight and morning, the world had turned. Danny Rivera stood 20 feet away, no longer the commanding presence that had dominated boardrooms and football fields. Without the carefully managed lighting and expensive suits, he looked smaller somehow, a middle-aged man whose empire was crumbling around him like the rusted machinery that surrounded them. Behind him, 3 men in dark clothing held Jenny between them, her hands zip-tied but her eyes fierce with unbroken defiance. 15 years, Danny said, his voice carrying across the morning air. 15 years you've been my partner in this, Tank. You really want to throw that away now? Marcus hefted the case in his hands, feeling the weight of photographs and witness statements, audio recordings and timeline documents, his daughter's life reduced to evidence, her death finally given voice. We were never partners. You had a master and I was your dog, but dogs sometimes bite. The distant sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, joined by the rumble of vehicles approaching on the access road. Agent Chen had moved fast, faster than even Marcus had hoped. The cavalry was coming, but whether they'd arrive in time remained an open question. Let her go, Danny. This is between you and me. Danny's laugh held no humor. Everything's between you and me, Tank. That's what 15 years of shared guilt does to people. We're bonded now, like it or not. We're bonded by my daughter's blood. Marcus took a step forward. Her name was Sarah Coleman. She was 22 years old, studying to be a nurse like her mother. She wanted to help people. She was a liability. She was my child. The words hung in the morning air like a prayer, and Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not the violent earthquake of rage he'd expected, but something quieter and more profound. A settling, like pieces of a broken foundation finally finding their proper place. You know what I realized in there? Marcus nodded toward the abandoned building. All these years I thought I was protecting you, but I was really just protecting my own cowardice. I was afraid of losing the life I'd built, afraid of facing what I'd become. But you can't lose something you never really had. The helicopters were close enough now that Marcus could see the FBI markings, and the convoy of black SUVs had crested the hill. Danny's men shifted nervously, their professional composure cracking as they realized the scope of law enforcement descending on their position. It's over, Marcus said quietly. Danny's face went through a series of emotions, rage, calculation, and finally something that might have been resignation. You think this absolves you? You think playing hero now erases 15 years of complicity? No. Marcus's voice carried a peace he hadn't felt in decades. Nothing erases that. I'll carry what I did for the rest of my life. But Sarah deserves justice, and I'm the only one left who can give it to her. The first FBI vehicle skidded to a stop 50 yards away, doors slamming as agents in tactical gear deployed with practiced precision. Through their radio chatter, Marcus caught fragments, hostage situation, suspects armed, proceed with caution. Danny raised his hands slowly, but his eyes never left Marcus's face. You know what the funny thing is, Tank? I actually respected you all these years, all the money I sent, I kept waiting for you to break. Kept waiting for that moment when you'd remember you used to be a man of principle. I never forgot, Marcus said. I just forgot that principles are only worth having if you're willing to sacrifice for them. Agent Chen appeared behind the tactical team, her weapon drawn but pointed down, professional and controlled. Mr. Coleman, step away from the suspect. We'll take it from here. Marcus looked at Jenny, saw her nod slightly, bruised but unbroken, alive and fighting. Then he looked at the case in his hands, at 15 years of buried truth finally seeing daylight. Agent Chen, he called out without moving. The evidence you need is in this case. Photos, witness statements, everything. But I want to be clear. I'm not a victim here. I'm an accomplice. When you're done with him, I'll be waiting to face whatever comes next. As Danny Rivera was led away in handcuffs, as Jenny was freed and medical personnel checked her for injuries, as crime scene technicians began processing the evidence that would finally give Sarah Coleman the justice she deserved, Marcus sat on a piece of rusted mining equipment and watched the sun climb higher over the Ohio hills. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus Coleman could breathe. The weight he'd carried was finally lifting, not because his guilt was absolved, but because he'd chosen to carry it honestly. Sarah was still gone, would always be gone, but her death would finally mean something more than Danny Rivera's continued freedom. Justice, Marcus had learned, wasn't about erasure. It was about accounting, and the books, at long last, were balanced.